Okay, well, why don't we get going on this Ethics at Noon and this important topic, do sports build character? Reflections on challenges on and off the field. This question, I think, in our pretty sports-crazy culture is one that has come up in any number of venues, including, if you haven't seen, a really fascinating and important article in the Chronicle of Higher Education entitled, Do Sports Build Character? By Professor Mark Edmondson at the University of Virginia. Really encourage you to take a look at that. But at home, anticipating Professor Edmondson's article, this has been a concern on the minds of Matt Savage here for the whole year, really. Matt is a cross-country and track runner here at Santa Clara. He also has a Hackworth Fellowship at the Ethics Center, a fellowship awarded to outstanding seniors to pursue topics in ethics of interest to their peers. And Matt, throughout the year, has been pursuing topics on sports and ethics, including part of which led to the creation of this blog Matt has called Savage on Sports, where he's written a number of very interesting articles on various topics having to do with ethics in intercollegiate sports. So our panel today will include Matt speaking on this topic, and then Zoe Craner, the academic support manager in the athletic department here at Santa Clara, where she works closely with student athletes in terms of their academic performance at school and has done a fantastic job on that. I've noted in emails sort of recognition for how well our student athletes do in their academic performance here. Zoe was also the captain of the field hockey team at Davidson College, where she played NCAA sports. And our third panelist today is Professor Chris Culp of the Department of Philosophy here at Santa Clara. Special thanks to Professor Culp. He's actually really taking some time that he otherwise could be using very importantly to be with us today. So thank you very much for being here. He teaches many classes here on topics in ethics. He is the chair of the university's Faculty Core Ethics Committee pertaining to ethics classes in the core curriculum. He's a long-term member of the steering committee of the Ethics Center, and of perhaps extra special note today, he is an extremely experienced mountain climber. I believe did Denali, is that correct? Or
attempted a hard route on it, which we didn't make it up.
There you go. That's good enough. That
lots of routes I didn't get up.
As well as the second place finisher in the worldwide CrossFit competition for the 60-plus age category. We keep saying no, it surely was the 30-plus, but he won't go with that. But really a fantastic achievement, which he won last year. I'd also just like to note, and I'm wondering, Monica, if you could switch over. We have another way of sort of approaching this topic. We have a new student life blog here on campus, Connected Ethics and Student Life Issues, called The Big Q. There is a case on that blog right now, as you can see, called A Good Sport, Do College Athletics Build Character? The case was drawn up by Jake Teeney, a Santa Clara senior, really in consultation with Matt, and we invite students to comment on the blog in response to the case, in response to this discussion here, and discussions more broadly on campus. So we'll have presentations, the three, Matt, Zoe, and Professor Culp, and then we'll open this up for discussion. So, Matt.
All right. So want to thank you all for coming out and being part of this conversation of sports and character. And before we get started, I guess I wanted to kind of frame the discussion by making sure it's clear what we mean when we talk about character. And coming from a major in philosophy, what I'm understanding character is harkens back to an Aristotelian understanding of virtue and vice. And character is really a collection of those virtues and vices that we develop, that we gain through habit throughout our lives. And so, to put it, I guess, crudely, a virtue would be any sense of good habit, or something that we can look to as praiseworthy morally within individuals. And so, in turning to sports, we look at in what ways do sports encourage the development of virtues, and maybe in what ways does sports kind of discourage it or shift away from really developing a sense of character built on good virtues and moral habits. And so in looking at sports, I think it's pretty clear that one of the predominant virtues coming out of it is courage, and this is something that Aristotle talked about, courage as a virtue. I was thinking even as recently as this year in college basketball, I don't know how many of you caught the Duke-North Carolina game when Duke was playing at North Carolina. Austin Rivers, a freshman, dribbling down the court in this very hostile environment as time's running down in the second half. He pulls up and shoots a three-pointer. They're down by 2 for the win, ends up sinking it, and the crowd goes silent. Now that takes an incredible amount of courage as an 18-year-old in such a hostile place to step up and want the ball in that situation to make that shot. And you see sport, this is kind of a hallmark within sports, that it places you in situations that with intense adversity where you are challenged to maybe beyond what you think you're capable of, and it requires an incredible sense of self-confidence and courage in order to meet those challenges and succeed. In addition to that, I think Aristotle didn't necessarily talk about it specifically, but I think we can understand ambition as being a virtue that sport can develop. I was thinking this last week just about Steve Jobs and kind of what an incredible person he was, and kind of a praiseworthy example of virtue, and what it took for him to kind of, he was always an imaginative, creative person, but what it took to kind of bring that potential into an actual scenario was incredible ambition. It took him pursuing a dream and not letting that die. And in the same way with sports, you have to be driven and you have to be motivated. You could be the most talented player ever. You know, LeBron James have all of the natural gifts and talents, but if you're not willing to get out of bed in the morning and go and work out and put in the time and the effort off the court, you really won't produce anything worthwhile. And so in that sense, ambition becomes a virtue, and something that athletics can promote and further. Additionally to that, a third virtue I was thinking of was perseverance. The best thing about sports, I think, is it teaches you how to deal with failure. You're not always going to win. There's incredible hardship that comes with losses, especially tough losses, and it's being able to recover from that. It's being able to, and it's different from courage, because courage is really in the moment. You have this pressure situation, and how am I going to respond in the moment? Perseverance is how do you respond once the moment has passed? Once you've failed or once you've succeeded, what do you do then? Are you satisfied? Do you sit back and say, this is where I am, I'm good, and become complacent? Or do you want to push further and kind of excel to a greater degree? And these are kind of 3 real key virtues that I think sports has the potential to really develop and encourage. And in that sense, yeah, we can answer the question definitively as yes. Does sports build character? Yes, in these 3 very tangible and real ways. But we also can't be naive. There are certainly challenges that athletics poses to building that character, especially in a contemporary context surrounding college athletics. Just to highlight the tension, I think, when we talk about character and ethics applied to sports is the current debate in professional football around concussions and player safety. There's a real push to place this emphasis on player safety as a concern, and really a moral and ethical concern. But then there's backlash coming from defensive players. People that come to mind are James Harrison or Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis more so than James Harrison, because he just expresses a sentiment that I can't play linebacker anymore. They've kind of taken away from my ability to excel at my position because I can't be as aggressive, or I can't be as defensive-minded as I want to be in order to excel athletically. And so there's this tension that's highlighted between an ethical standard being placed on an athlete who feels that detracts from their ability to perform in competition. Going along the same vein is with Aristotle, when we talk about virtue, a key component to that is temperance and moderation. That everything's kind of exists, that really you act in vice when you act deficiently in virtue as well as excessively. And athletics tends to promote the excessive. So in terms of courage, ambition, perseverance, athletics requires that you extend yourself in all those aspects. Ambition being kind of the key thing that comes to mind. If you want to be the best at your particular position or the best in your sport with respect to individual sports, that requires an intense amount of ambition that can have a negative effect where you kind of put yourself on an island. You sort of isolate yourself as an individual, and you tend to push people away from you. Even within team athletics, there was a big knock on Michael Jordan playing on the Bulls that, and this also goes to Kobe Bryant as well, that they're very intense with their teammates. When they don't feel like their teammates are performing up to their expectations, they have a high expectation for their teammates. And so you can kind of, really take that to an extreme where you kind of distance yourself in that relationship, and you really end up hurting any sense of a relationship because your drive to be successful and your ambition kind of takes over and pushes you too far. In addition, I think you can't talk about challenges to virtue without talking about the money and the wealth, and the revenue, especially now in college athletics. And this kind of the entry point I want to focus on is coaches' salaries. When you have coaches being paid as much as they are, the obvious emphasis is on winning and victory. It's hard to pay a coach that amount of money and then allow them to just focus on developing athletes' character or looking on the ethical. That's certainly an important role the coach plays, but there's an obvious message coming from universities that if we're going to pay you multi-million dollars worth of money, we expect you to win, to have victory, so that revenue starts coming back in terms of ticket sales, donations, and things like that. And so you have this whole economic layer that will detract necessarily from that kind of pure idealistic notion of sports as a way of building character and that sort of thing. And finally, Aristotle talked about an intellectual. There's virtues of character that are shown in habit and actions, but there also is required an intellectual sense of understanding why why this is a virtuous action and why you go about doing this. And as athletes, I think it's easy for us to understand courage in the context of athletic competition. And it's easier for us to understand ambition in terms of athletic competition and perseverance in terms of athletic competition. But when it comes to outside of that particular context, athletes struggle a little bit more in kind of carrying that over into all areas of their lives. And this kind of comes to my final point of how to address these challenges. And really what it comes down to is understanding that athletics has an end, and that's victory, that's winning. And it's about achieving that goal. But it's not merely an end in and of itself. That athletics is also part of this sort of greater end towards that we all share towards happiness and moral virtue. And if we can understand it in that context, then the emphasis on character becomes more important. And we don't just focus on the mere immediate end, but we look at the greater end as well. I mean, for all athletes, except for maybe Professor Culp, who's kind of a freak of nature, the athletic competition ends. Your body just can't. Your body breaks down, and you don't physically compete at those highest levels anymore. And so if you treat sports merely as an end in the moment that you're competing, then you miss out on this whole wealth of opportunity that once you've stopped competing in that sport can carry over into the rest of your life and really exemplify that virtue. And I think that's something we do really well here at Santa Clara, actually, is having a focus for our student athletes that goes beyond just the athletic field. I was thinking about ambition and perseverance specifically, and the tremendous academic success that our student athletes have, that we take our understanding of being the best that we can be on the field, and we really do apply that outside in other contexts, because our GPA is on par with the rest of the academic community, the rest of the students. And so there is a sense, I think there's a large focus put on that here at Santa Clara, and I think it would be better if that were kind of moved into the national scene as well, because it seems to me that there's less and less. especially in the big revenue generating sports and schools, that there's less of this emphasis put on and more an emphasis put on just merely winning in order to see more revenue or anything like that. And so that was what I had to say. Hopefully it was clear and not too rushed. But I'll turn it over to Zoe now.
Great. Well, that's a really helpful intro to kind of set the stage about what we're talking about when we say character. And I was struck by the fact that what Matt started off by saying is that habit cultivates virtue or character, where character could be either vice or virtue. And I think that's spot on. Our habits do have so much to do with kind of, I think of the rock tumbler metaphor, and whatever's in there may get polished into something one way or the other. You don't really know what's inside, but habit, continuous repetition of one set of behaviors is going to draw out something. So I think my real short and simple answer is that I see sport as having enormous potential to develop positive character, but there are no guarantees. I see it as an incredible curriculum, a lot like our academic curriculum, and that's why I find it so exciting to work at the intersection of the both academia and athletics. And so if we look at academia and see it as kind of a pressure cooker of sorts that requires us to become well-versed in lots of areas, we see academia bring out the very finest in some people and not so much in other people. And we could start to look at why, and I'm not going to go into the individual assets those people start with. I think it's more to do with the differences in their experience. But I see sport as doing something really similar, especially at the college level, by putting us under tremendous pressure. Tremendous pressure that we elect, which is a lot like academia again. And we're aspiring to a certain mark of greatness. We're aspiring to a certain level of competence. And so on that path, we sign up for the same rituals over and over and over, whether it's just the discipline of physical fitness or actually perfecting some small facet of the game we're pursuing. So I think that's one major piece of it. I hope that makes some sense, just that by entering into the same ritual over and over and over, something special is happening. Some people find that in their faith practices. So I know that might seem like a really large leap, but in my own experience as a college athlete, I found that your body knows all kinds of things that your mind doesn't necessarily hold at any given moment. And when you enter into a physical practice over and over and over in the pursuit of competence and competition, there's a realm for reflection kind of emerges. You get to see yourself in new ways. So I see sport actually as an area where you have the potential to know yourself extraordinarily well. And I think knowing yourself extraordinarily well is a virtue. So that's kind of one simple one there. And I love that the body does get to be involved, because there are things that we physically know over time that we don't necessarily verbalize or intellectually pinpoint. And Matt actually touched on the crossover from what character does emerge in sport, and then how do you carry that over into everyday life. I think there's a real dearth of conversation there, and that's part of what's so disappointing about this really rich curriculum of athletics at times, that then doesn't necessarily cross over 100%, but I don't see any good reason why not. There is character that gets, positive character that gets developed there that could be applied in any other, any number of other arenas. Team sport, I find, requires an enormous amount of integrity. There's a kind of accountability that emerges when you're dealing with other human beings, and I can even compare team sport to what a good intimate relationship does to people. If you report to one person for 20 or 30 years, it makes certain demands of you. This kind of, again, I probably will shoot off on tangents, but I found team sport to be an enormously intimate experience. The relationships you build with your coach and your teammates, they demand something real from you, whether that's always positive or kind of ugly. You have to be sort of honest with your teammates, because they see you in the heat of the moment. They're going to find out one way or the other what's actually true about your contributions. So there's a constant demand to be real about whether you are or are not contributing, you are or are not supporting the person next to you. And I think that with long-term relationships, with committed long-term relationships, one of the things that we stand to gain is being held to a certain level of integrity. There's an integrity that develops. There's a demand to keep growing. You can't just sort of sit and exist and expect things to be awesome when you're trying to be connected to another person over time. So I see something similar happening with team sport, where there's, again, just a demand for integrity and a constant examination of your own ability to contribute. You can't play a team sport and not contribute and feel awesome about yourself as an athlete. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter how talented you are. So that's something kind of special there. The commitment factor is certainly big. Working now with student athletes, I can see this from my own experience and also through the experience of hundreds of others over the years. The curriculum of college athletics requires a kind of commitment, if for no other reason, just out of pure repetition, again, having done something so many times that you know it inside and out, it has a familiarity to it, you know what perfection feels like, looks like, smells like. There's a commitment in there that not many people necessarily experience before 21 or 22. So I think there's a lot of potential there to draw out positive character just by having exposed somebody to the feeling of really die-hard commitment. And there are so many places that you can find that, but I think sport gives it actually physical manifestation, which again for some people is you comprehend it more deeply because it's physical. Just like if you actually physically walk to a church, your faith practice has a physical embodiment that makes it more tangible for you, more likely to be repeated, something along those lines. So the commitment is a big piece. I want to also throw out kind of as if I haven't already thrown out some curveballs, the piece where sport is, I see athletics as a rather hyper-masculine realm, an arena that really emphasizes what we think of as positive male attributes, aggression, competition, strength, not typically things little girls are raised to go after real hard, more and more, but the reality is we still have very different gender norms. And so I think that when women participate in sport, they have an opportunity to explore pieces of their self-expression and of their strengths that they might not rigorously explore otherwise. It's not every day you get applauded for throwing an elbow and then leaving someone in the dust, but it can happen if you're in the right place. And I know for myself that was wonderful to have a right place where you could be scrappier and be more confrontational. Women in general have less confrontational styles of interacting with one another. It can be pretty passive-aggressive communication between women at times, but when you get together on a sporting field, it's really simple. Whoever ran faster won the race. It has to be acknowledged right then and there. So it's a neat opportunity, I think, for women to try out different sets of expression, different sets of strengths, and kind of explore different levels of assertion. It was stark for me to exit sport and kind of be reminded at 22 that most women don't behave that way on a regular basis, and kind of have to figure where those things were going to shake out and how confrontational can you actually be as a woman on a daily basis without people thinking something's not right, or you're trying to start a fight. So I think that's an interesting piece, and you can apply the inverse to men for sure. If you're already male and you're entering into a hyper-masculine realm every day, over and over, exacerbating competition, emphasizing physical prowess, all of those things, I think there's the potential for it to exacerbate vice, not virtue, but not necessarily. It's all about good balance. And I can't say enough that I see sport as a curriculum, and so there are, as with an academic curriculum, there are educators involved with sports curricula, and the great ones, I think, take care to draw out the virtues, not the vices. So that's kind of a basic point. Okay. A couple more quick points. I don't think it's come up yet, but some people enter into sport and display a totally different set of moral values than they do when they exit sport. We see it in professional sports sometimes. You probably see it in intramural sports sometimes. I've come to refer to that as just sort of bracketed morality. You're one person until you cross the edge of the field, and then you're another person for, 60 minutes, whatever it is. I think that's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it just sort of points out that, again, sport can draw out all sorts of things, And for some people, competition is not a healthy medium for self-exploration. I think that's kind of how I'd frame that. It's not necessarily the best way for them to develop character. For others, it's wonderful. And again, back to team sports, I think in good team sports experience, you learn who not to team up with when the stakes are high, because it's going to get ugly. You don't want to go there. You choose different people. So back to the pressure cooker, it all sort of lines up. I want to touch real briefly before I pass things off on the challenges in college sport. I haven't talked a lot about, or at all really, about professional sport. Again, for me, sport is really about a curriculum, not so much about the cultural icon that I think most people encounter it to be on a daily basis. I think that one of the challenges to college sport is lack of understanding. We tend to think sports and athletics and leap right to professional sports as the end of that continuum. Like, where does this end? Well, it ends with millions of dollars, fame, fortune, big lights, all of that. And that's one of the ways it ends. It also, I think, could be related to more like a Renaissance man education of a well-roundedness that I would think we could embrace well as a Jesuit university. So when I think about how to make sport, how to problem solve so that sport remains a place where character gets developed for the better, I think understanding is really the key there. And our ideas about professional sport infiltrate even the university, and so we don't think about sport as an opportunity to cultivate self-understanding so much as the first step of this big glamorous thing. And then dumb jock stereotypes trickle in. That makes it really challenging to be a student athlete who's working hard at a dual curriculum. So I think that understanding is just sort of key in really examining why it is we ever got into the practice as humans of pursuing a sport to these really high levels of excellence and finding that interesting enough to do it an astonishing number of hours per week, despite many levels of discomfort. So.
Thank you. Well, it may look as if I've got hold of Matt's and Zoe's notes and wrote mine up, but actually I didn't. Just several preliminaries, which I'll keep very brief. What is sport? Well, I can't offer you a rigorous definition of what constitutes sport. Actually, I agree with the philosopher Wittgenstein, who thinks that there are a number of family resemblances of these activities, all of which we call sport, but there's no set of necessary and jointly sufficient conditions that have got to be fulfilled. So there's some fancy stuff for the professors here. But what I have in mind by a sport is that which is typified by varsity and intramural sports in college and cognate activities, all of which emphasize various types of physical prowess, fitness, strength, etc., combined with the exercise of strategic and tactical elements. Baseball qualifies, poker doesn't. Secondly, by character, I mean, roughly speaking, what Aristotle meant. And Aristotle, I think, as Matt and Zoe have both implicitly acknowledged, provides a very natural framework by which to address the issues that we're confronting here. By character, I mean essentially the settled dispositions to behave in certain ways, in particular dispositions to behave in ways that are relevant to ethical assessment. And by building character, I mean contributing to the long-term development of character traits that we find morally desirable. Courage, perseverance, generosity, cooperativeness, integrity, in short, what are often called virtues of character. Once again, loosely in the sense which Aristotle had in mind. So we panelists have been asked to address the issue of whether sports build character. Well, my answer to that is yes, it can build character. I do not think, however, and my other panelists have endorsed this as well, I do not think that sport inevitably builds character. It does not necessarily do so, but it may do so. My very dear friend, Fred Perella of the Department of Religious Studies here at Santa Clara, tells me that Damon Bruce, who's the KNBR Sports Talk Show radio host, ends every show, according to Fred, with this line: "Sports doesn't build character, it reveals it." Well, I don't fully agree with this, but I don't fully disagree with it either. Certainly sport, as do many other, if not most, other forms of practical activity. By practical activity, I mean activity that engages action. reveals character. Virtually everything I think we do really does. Well, that's a truism and really not that interesting. But at a deeper level, it is interesting because, as Matt was noting here, sport can and often does, especially in the arena of competition and in non-areas of competition like mountain climbing, can place a person in extremis that sorely tests one's capacity to persevere, to carry on in a fashion that we consider morally praiseworthy or honorable or worthy of our esteem. It can be a terrible crucible that tests one. There may be considerable emotional pressures involved. Champions can deal with this. Many athletes of lesser accomplishment cannot. In fact, I dare to say it's probably the sine qua non of success at high levels, that you have got to be able to deal with pressure. And if you can't, it's not going to go. At the higher levels of achievement in competition in particular, there will be severe demands placed on one's self-discipline, both on and off the field. Training for strength and fitness, for example. Nutrition. As an older athlete, believe me, this is really an issue. You really have got to pay attention to factors off the field, or you're not going to succeed, pure and simple, on the field. Development of skills may be arduous. The athlete may have to deal with considerable physical discomfort, perhaps severe pain. In some sports, there is a non-negligible risk of severe injury or even death. Football, severe injury. Mountain climbing, I know too many who haven't made it. So how one deals with these factors clearly reveals character. So I concur with the KNBR sports person to that extent. But I say, in disagreement apparently with the sports announcer, that it can build character as well by encouraging and developing just the sort of character traits that one hopes will be revealed in sport, namely the moral virtues. Now, the specifics of how sport builds character is, in part, pretty clearly an empirical question, and I suppose I should say, as a responsible academic, at least I try, that I imagine this should be in the hands of social scientists more than anecdotal approaches such as I'm able to give it. That said, the evidence supporting the efficacy of sport for character development seems to me ubiquitous. If sport doesn't build character, if it can't, consider this, the raison d'etre of including sport in the college curriculum evaporates, or at least is very severely compromised. Sport would then become merely recreative, therefore really not worthy of inclusion in a educational program, or perhaps the generation of funds merely, or the entertainment of others. None of those as the primary reason for the inclusion of sport in the curriculum looks very attractive to me. So I believe it does and can build character, but need not necessarily do so. I see sport as contributing to a kind of proper function of the individual. So I'm seeing sport as part of a broader theory of what it constitutes to be functioning well as a human being. This is Aristotelian. Sport, after all, we are both physical and mental beings. I won't enter into those who would like to conflate the two. Just pass over those sorts of concerns here. And I think that sport, at least may, serve the furtherance of both of these components of our natures. Sport serves the physical through the exercise of our physical being, which has become, I'm sorry to say, de-emphasized in our contemporary, highly technologized, comfort-seeking, risk-averse society. It is compromised with serious implications for our health, both physical and, I think, emotional. Sport also serves the mental in the sense that, at least, that serves the mental in the sense that I wish to highlight, through the employ of our physicality in conjunction with our intellect to develop our character. Now, look, I doubt that it is possible to assess sport's relation to character development from a value-neutral stance, and I won't try. My ideal, Culp's ideal, which is also broadly Aristotelian in nature, is the pursuit of both physical and mental robustness. A robustness of person, if you will, which is roughly what Theodore Roosevelt celebrated when he advocated his pursuit of what he called the strenuous life. That is my ideal. I recognize that, unfortunately, the pursuit of this ideal, robustness of the person, the strenuous life, is to varying degree closed to many. To some because of physical limitations, to some because of broadly mental limitations. I want to emphasize that it is closed to a degree. This isn't to say that a person who is impaired can't pursue this at all. It's a complication. There may be great benefit to be derived from surmounting those complications. I do, however, think that this ideal is open to most of us, and I think that sport, including sport in the context of the college curriculum, can contribute to this ideal, and it does so, I suggest, through the symbiotic relation of the physical and the intellectual, culminating, I should hope, in a kind of robustness of character, a manifestation of the moral virtues that we've been discussing, of courage, of perseverance, of decency toward others, of self-respect, etc. But this positive influence is not inevitable. For example, athletes, including college athletes, can be consumed by the winning isn't everything, it is the only thing mentality, which views success on the field as a virtual final end, an end towards which all other pursuits are subordinate. This, I think, is a perversion of a proper conception of the value of sport. A proper conception of the value of a sport views the process of the participation of the activity at least as importantly as the goal of winning. They're actually inextricably linked, I think, when conceived properly. Fans and supporters, I might add, or can be deeply complicit in the perversion of these ideals. There's also, often as we've all been noting, as is obvious, a preoccupation with wealth and notoriety. They can blind people, competitors and spectators alike, to the deepest and most enduring values of sport, and this preoccupation is nowhere more evident, I suggest, than in professional team sports these days, such as football, basketball, and baseball. An appreciation of what I consider the most defensible value of sport, namely its service in the pursuit of this robustness of person, which importantly includes the characterological, is strongly challenged by today's society. I think there's a complex set of factors involved in this challenge, but I suggest at bottom, or near the bottom at any rate, is a tension between the forces of a hyper-technologized world which manifest themselves both economically and valuationally, and a proper recognition of our fundamental physicality. I think that insistence on the relevance of sport to the development of the whole person, to use a more Catholic term, can be a very, very important step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. We now have time for your questions and comments. Please keep them brief and to the point, and Matt will be calling on those who wish to speak.
Yeah.
That was great, thank you. I think you were all talking about sport for individual character formation, but the athlete also is situated in a larger society where there tends to be a lot of adulation, and sometimes athletes are allowed to get away with things that other people are not allowed to get away with because we admire them so. And it does seem that there's some seriously bad behavior that is associated with team sports. And I wondered whether you'd want to comment just on sports as they're situated kind of in the larger society.
We're all clamoring to go first.
I guess I would say, personally, I think a lot of the demonization that goes into athletes' behavior is created. I think a lot of the things that athletes get in trouble for outside of the university is a little absurd, to put it kind of crudely. the NCAA has a lot of regulations in terms of, for instance, I would have no problem with an athlete going and signing something and receiving money for having signed some piece of memorabilia, and then giving to it and having that exchange outside of the university, away from it. But the NCAA frowns on that, and that's a violation. In terms of the other ones you're talking about, yeah, I think a lot of it has to go with that that corruption of being placed on a pedestal. You're kind of assumed to be. The celebration kind of builds a mentality where you can feel like you get away with everything, but to say that sports creates that might be going too far, because there are few athletes like that are few and far between. There are thousands of other athletes. I think about those cliche NCAA commercials where they go, there are this many athletes participating in sports, and all of us will be going pro in something other than sports. I think athletics in general doesn't necessarily create that. We have, just as a culture, this sense to attract to figures that we find to be, incredible examples of human achievement. And in that sense, athletes get placed in that category in the same way that, a Nobel Prize winning person would get put in that pedestal, or a president or something like that. And so I don't know if it's necessarily sport that does that, it's more of a cultural response to a great sports figure.
Yeah, I agree that there's a conversation to be had there about notoriety in general, fame in general, whether it's actually fame or just small town relative fame. They kind of work the same way. They're difficult to handle in similar ways. And there's also a magnifying glass that comes with doing something that your society places capital on. So when you're admired for being an athlete, in the college sport context, it's easy to see that if you're a student athlete, you're immediately recognized as an ambassador of the university, and if you do something wrong, it reflects badly not only on your team, but on the entire department, on all of college athletics, actually. So there is some interesting magnification that goes on there, and it only takes one member of a soccer team or a rugby team doing something stupid to have the whole program look bad. So there's a group identity conversation too, but I agree with a lot of your comments.
I see something here, Miriam. I may disagree a bit here with these folks. I think that we have to understand, typically when we're dealing with college sports in particular, we're dealing with young folks, and with the consequent limitations on their experience and et cetera, and the judgment. And there can be, I fear, and some of them can, for a variety of reasons, get the message that their physicality really is the most important thing about them that they have to offer. And by my lights, that is unfortunate. We hear, for example, about the muscle heads at poor old Gold's Gym seems to be everybody's whipping boy on this. But you have the muscle heads who just seem to be these kind of brutes. Well, I'm not going to say that I think that's true or false, though I'm definitely not saying I think it's false. In any event, I don't think that that's the kind of mentality that the university should be seeking to conduce to in the sports program, and some people get that message. And so I think that this is a genuine challenge. And I must say, I think that Santa Clara, so far as I can tell, I've been teaching here for 25 years, I think we are relatively free of that. But, and I think it has to do with the wisdom of how we approach things here on this. But it is not shared otherwise. I also do agree in part with what these folks were saying too, is that it's the broader context in which some of these things are placed, and unfortunate things happen as a result of that. But I do think we need to keep our eye on this.
Yeah, I think your question also highlights the idea that character is not isolated to the individual. And Aristotle talks about this too, that really a lot of our character formation is dependent upon the community that we're in. And so your question, I think, almost is pointing at the greater culture, and that's kind of what I meant when I was giving my response, I guess, was that's more of a cultural flaw that we have, that we leap on so much praise on these individuals, and then we get mad when we see them do something completely selfish or completely egotistical, and we get mad at that athlete without stopping and reflecting to what degree we encourage that sort of character and mentality. So that's an element that I think speaks to the culture as a whole, and whether it's the university that the athletes competing at, or the professional sports team, and then how America treats its athletes and things like that. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Hi, my name is Brittany Yap. I'm the writer at Office of Marketing and Communication, and I'm really happy you had this panel discussion because I've been thinking about this for many years now, how team building and playing sports my entire life has made me who I am today. And what Zoe said really resonated with me, not only with the women, playing, being athletic and being assertive, and as soon as I stopped playing college soccer, I realized that you can't be as assertive as you want to be in your everyday thing as a woman, because people look at you like, are you going to hit me now? Or, But I think one thing that wasn't said was sports builds humility. Growing up, my dad was my coach. I was lucky enough when I started playing soccer when I was 5, and he always taught me that you practice hard when no one's watching. You don't just do it because people are watching you or because you're going to get praised for it. You do it to get better and get ahead of the game. If you're not practicing hard, someone else is practicing harder, and they're going to beat you. So I grew up with this, kind of humbleness with sports, accepting defeat, accepting win, and being humble about it, shaking people's hands after, thanking your coaches, thanking your parents. Michelle Nagamine is an alum of Santa Clara University, and she was my soccer coach at Kamehameha Schools in Hawaii. And so she taught us a lot about being humble and things like that. So it's kind of interesting that I tie back to Santa Clara in that way. But I do think with the women thing, it's kind of interesting. That's like a whole other topic to go into, though.
For sure.
About assertiveness and things like that. But I feel like when I thought about this topic, I thought about being a kid and growing up playing sports from when you're young and how that can build character versus what the media and what the culture does to you when you're at the top already.
Sure.
So growing up, I think I would love my kids to play sports and being a team sport, because when they enter the workforce, I want them to be able to deal with teams. And in the workplace, that's a lot of things, dealing with the team, making a decision as a team, taking initiative, things like that. So I think sports has developed me in the right way. And the other thing I was going to ask you is that I started a mixed martial arts magazine in Hawaii. I was a woman starting a men's driven sport magazine, and I was wondering what you thought about MMA and ethics, like mixed martial arts and ethics. Some people won't even call that a sport, but
Well, I wanted to comment real quickly, backing up. I don't want to miss that question, but backing up just to say that, to the concept of the strenuous life, humility points to an exploration of limitations, and I think that's huge in sport. People imagine that when you have great sport accolades, it probably grows your head. Anything but. I feel like if you get great at sports, you know exactly why you got great and exactly all the things that could have made you terrible and all the ways you strategically managed to keep contending. It's a very humbling experience, and so I love the exploration of limitations that it offers. MMA, I'm going to make myself sound really violent. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really neat that there are as many people who will sign up for it, and it's all, they're entering in willfully. It's not for everyone, that's for sure, but I don't see anything unethical about mixed martial arts.
Yeah, I just noted, it was very interesting. I referred to the article by Professor Edmondson from the University of Virginia about do sports build character. In that article, he talks about the way that sports that have a more physical, or he calls it kinetic dimension, like football and things like that, he regards truly as sport. He does not regard boxing as a sport, because he believes that it is sort of removed, it has taken the sort of underlying kind of martial idea too far. And I'll sort of extrapolate from his comment. I think he would say that mixed martial arts would not qualify as a sport. So an interesting question you raise about what does and what doesn't qualify, and why we think something is a sport and what isn't.
But if you wanted to say MMA had some kind of ethical understanding, I don't know. I knew a guy that was training. He was a former football player, and he had done a lot of training. And I was actually blown away of his understanding of the physical body and this goes back to that conversation. He goes, if I get you in this hold, I know exactly how much pressure to apply and what's going to happen when I apply that pressure. And so long as there's an understanding of I'm in this context and I don't want to take that harm too far, I just want to do enough to subdue my opponent, you can still have, I guess, some root of an ethics. It's a little skewed in that sense, but perhaps, I don't know if that answers or helps. Abe?
I was kind of wondering, with the intrinsic nature of sports going towards the end, and I'm seeing a lot of athletic department people here, I was wondering if any of you guys want to chime in as well, but how do you think scholarships can affect this? Because there's 4 rowers here, there's no scholarships given to us. We still build character, and I'm wondering, does it change at all? Does the incentive and the encouragement of assistance for learning and sports being combined, do you think that's changing the nature of what characteristics are being bred and strengthened?
That's actually a really good question. When you said it, I was thinking of how scholarships now are 1-year conditional, renewed scholarships, and how that really puts pressure on an athlete to compete and succeed. Otherwise, there's kind of a fear that this other guy could replace me, or they could recruit somebody else and revoke my scholarship, or what happens if I get hurt and the university just drops me from its commitment. So yeah, I think that's something that really can't. I'm not a scholarship athlete either, so I don't really I can't speak to whether it changes a mentality, but I can see how it could. And yeah.
Does anyone else in the room want to speak to that before I do?
Sure. I think it does impact. I think that sports can and does build character, but it can also have the opposite impact. And I see it with my kids and kids that, and you talk about that cultural aspect, and some of the best kids at various levels are already at age 8 or 10 are given the thought that, hey, I'm what it's all about, and their parents treat them that way, and the other kids treat them that way, and you see it affecting their character and their personality in a very decidedly negative way. And I think when you take a sport like Peru, which here has no scholarships, I think the case for building character with what they go through, the discipline they go through, the fact that they're not in it to be on TV or even to get a scholarship, and the bonds that they get that they develop together, it's easy for me as an administrator to think having a crew program, even though it doesn't have scholarships, it's a great thing because it gets to the educational aspect of sports. The challenge for administrators, I think, is when you have some of the other things like scholarships and some of the other accolades and attention and the demands for the entertainment part of it, that becomes a greater challenge for us, because especially at a place like Santa Clara, you have to have the educational part of it. Otherwise, there is no reason to have the sport. And so to answer your question, I think it is easier in the case of Peru. There's less challenges to that.
May I just say that I think this gentleman said that was excellent as far as I'm concerned. I concur fully with what you said.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the Division III model, I guess, where they don't give scholarships. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like they're really trying to preserve that ideal of sport as an educational tool, mm-hmm. rather than some other.
Yeah. And I think in the experience of being a scholarshiped athlete, you could make the argument that it's not as different as being unscholarshiped as you might think, because the experience really does take over. My sports scholarship was a critical piece of me being able to go to a school that had a comparable price tag on it as this school. It wouldn't have happened without sports scholarship, but I really don't think that crossed my mind very often. Once I was there for so many other reasons. If someone had pointed it out to me, of course it was a big logistical factor, but it rarely entered into my consciousness. But that doesn't mean it doesn't shape the industry, change the approach, make 8-year-olds hot items when an 8-year-old's a hot item, like for the rest of his life, that's pretty interesting. And I think it boils down to money, and that's kind of scary. So yeah, having no money attached changes things in a good way.
Yeah.
Okay, I read an article recently where someone was talking about concussions in football, and they theorized that possibly football could be completely like removed from the American landscape because of concussions. Eventually, parents are going to see they don't want their kids to get concussions when they're 10, 12, 15. Keep your kids out of football. Do you guys have any opinion on this? Like, it's possibly happening.
Oh, yes, I've been reading about this too. I'm concerned about it. One of my children are. I have a stepdaughter who's. This isn't relevant for her, given her age and interest and whatnot. But 2 boys, they are interested in this thing, so it hasn't really. I haven't confronted it directly as a parent, but yeah, I'd be pretty worried about this brain trauma. I do think that actually, I disagree with the gentleman who said that he didn't think boxing was a sport and mixed martial arts were sports. I certainly think that they are. However, I'm worried in particular about boxing, in which I understand that there's a lot more serious trauma involved in boxing than there is in mixed martial arts. And we're seeing increasing evidence, I take it, that brain trauma among kids playing football, and I think also what soccer is now being implicated, isn't it, from heading the ball?
Only 10,000 plus head hits, according to some of the.
Whoa. Well,
Easy to get there.
I think that sport. If we have a military action, then we have to deal with what we have to deal with. But I don't want to see sport being a contributor to that kind of trauma. So yeah, I'm worried about it. Now whether there can be designs that would remedy this, that's much discussed. But I'm not for brain injuries. No.
Yeah. Interesting. Trying to frame it. I know we're running out of time here, but when we try and actually think about that question ethically, I'm thinking about the fact that people go rock climbing and fall to their death, and why should people not be able to run their head into somebody else's head if that's what they want to do? But it is a little bit different when it's this multi-billion-dollar empire that has little boys hoping to go ruin their brain someday. So it gets different.
May I also add, it's one thing if you're 21 and you want to do this, then we can have that discussion. But it's something else if you're 14 and want to do it.
Right.
I think there are, and Zoe might be able to know more about this, there are sociological studies, though, that look at aggression within societies as a kind of systemic of the culture. And so if you want to talk about completely removing football from the landscape, I just don't see that as a possibility, just because there's so much of it in our society, whether it's, our economic system is built on it, kind of this sense of competition and defeating your opponent. We're a very militaristic society. There's plenty of other areas where we have this aggressive mentality and behavior that I think it's almost become a part of our culture that we couldn't remove entirely. We can, as we've seen, we've tried to limit that aggression, but as I tried to point out, there's a lot of tension built between that because it feels like that doesn't belong within the realm of athletics.
That's not to say that the NFL or the NCAA are sitting idly by, not addressing the issue, which I think they are.
Right.
I think the NCAA has new concussion protocols that we undergo here at Santa Clara when a student athlete is diagnosed with a concussion. NFL has instituted new rules to protect the quarterback, to protect players who are defenseless. And so I think those things are impacting the game of football in a very positive way to take away from the dangers of.
Theodore Roosevelt, I think, was the first to address this in a really meaningful way, who was a pretty robust fellow.
Yeah.
Let me just say, we have actually invited, and I think gotten confirmation, on Tuesday, April 10th, Mike Pereira. Some of you football fans may know of him. Santa Clara grad and the former top NFL officiating official. Frequently they speak to him on NFL games to sort of moderate various disputes on the field. He will be speaking here at Santa Clara on the question of football and whether the rules in football have caught up with the game in some way. So you'll get more info about that, and love to have you at that conversation Tuesday, April 10th. Also, for students in here, please, I invite you to comment on the case on the Big Q. At stake for you is a $100 gift certificate to the Amazon gift certificate for the best ethical commentary in response to the case in the Big Q. So please take a look at that blog site. Finally, and certainly not least, please join me in thanking the panel for wonderful presentations. This has been videotaped, and so we're going to put the link of this up on, I believe, Matt's blog, or we'll let you know where it is in case people want to see it. I think it'll be on Matt's blog.
The case that we're doing this week is on a site called Policy Mike. If you come to our regular site, we'll get there, and this will also be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
going to live a robust life.